who is an associate professor of history and the director of the World History Center at the University of Pittsburgh. She is also a principal investigator of the World Historical Gazetteer, and she is the author of 2 books, Dividing the Realm, On Order to Govern, the Spatial Organization of the Song State, 960 through 1276, current era, and The Yellow River, A Natural and Unnatural History, and is co-editor of Placing Names, Enriching and Integrating Gazetteers. Joining her in today's presentation is Dr. Karl Grossner, who is the technical director and lead developer of for the World Historical Gazetteer project, a geographer, and the DH developer, research developer. Dr. Grossner earned a PhD in geography at the University of California, Santa Barbara in 2010, where he worked on ontologies for representing historical geographic knowledge and topics concerning spatial thinking and learning. Following that, he spent 5 years at Stanford University Libraries, designing and building interactive scholarly works in collaboration with historians, archaeologists, and literary scholars. His data modeling work and related publications have always focused on joining space and time in various ways. His 2016 book chapter, Place, Period, and Setting for Linked Data Gazetteers, appeared in the volume Placing Names, Enriching and Integrating Gazetteers, co-edited with the World History Gazetteer principal investigator, Dr. Ruth Mostern. In their presentation entitled Bringing Place into the Classroom with the World Historical Gazetteer, they will give support to teachers in integrating information about historical places and historical place names in their lessons. And without further ado, I would like to turn the virtual microphone and the table to Dr. Mostern and Dr. Grossner.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you all today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Hope you can all see that. So I want to start today by talking a little bit about what we're going to do over the course of the next 3 hours. We have in mind a hands-on workshop. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes about the idea of place. Why is place interesting? Why are place names interesting? One of the things I love about this topic is that it seems so commonsensical, and yet it isn't. And so it's just that thing that professors love to do, to take something that you think you know about, and then hopefully, if I'm doing my job right, kind of unsettle and resettle some of your assumptions. And then Karl Grossner will lead a walkthrough of the features and functionality of the World Historical Gazetteer, which is the historical place name tool that we're going to be talking about today. And then we'll have a series of breakout sessions that allow you to get your hands on the World Historical Gazetteer, look at what you can do with some of the functionality, allow you to look up names and explore places, to build collections with names, and then finally in the last breakout session to start designing a lesson plan using these concepts about place names and the tools of the World Historical Gazetteer. I gather that by the end of the week, one of the things that you're all going to be doing is finalizing a lesson plan. And so this will give you an opportunity to think about how you might incorporate some of these ideas about historical places and historical place names into the lesson plans that you're building. And then we'll end with a wrap up and a Q&A. So with that, I just want to talk a little bit about place. And when we think about place, right, what I want to stress is that a place and a place name are not the same things. So every place is located somewhere in the world. Every place has at least one name, some kind of label. It might have many names, right? And it is some setting for events. It's a place that is meaningful to people and where things happen. And a couple examples I like to introduce. One is this example on the left about a Belgian farmer. This is a story from about a year ago about a Belgian farmer who accidentally moved the French border, right? He was plowing his fields. He found this stone. The stone was in his way. And so he picked it up and put it somewhere else. And it turned out that that stone was intended to be a border marker. And then a local history enthusiast was walking around and he's like, wait a minute, this is not where it's supposed to be. And so what is really interesting to me about this particular story about this, which I got, I think, from a BBC website, is that instead of causing an international uproar, the incident has been met with smiles on both sides of the border. And of course, the fact that it's the border between, Belgium and France, and not a border where people are at war. It's not a border where people are living and dying over the exact location of that border, or where there's a crisis over refugees or immigrants, is what makes this a sort of a cute story rather than a life and death story. And so that starts to get at some of, what is place? How are places meaningful in different ways when they're in different locations at different times and to different people? And then another example here on the right. I'm not sure if you all are local to Pittsburgh or not. If you're local, you may well be familiar with this location right next to Phipps Conservatory, where for many years there was a statue of Christopher Columbus standing. It has now been tented. The city of Pittsburgh has decided that we no longer want to be a city that commemorates Christopher Columbus. And so that place is now being transformed into something else, no longer a location where you can say, meet me at the Christopher Columbus statue, right? A place where that will have some different label. We don't know what yet, right? Same location, but a different place, right? And that's what I really want to stress with this image here on the right-hand side of the screen, is that even if something is the same location, it can have, its name can change, the kinds of events for which it is a setting can change, right? All of those things can be transformed, even though it occupies the same place on the Earth's surface. And this starts to get at why place is so interesting, and also why place is always historical, right? Place is always about time as well as about location. And it's always about the way that people make meaning through time in a location. And so to reiterate that, right, place is not about geography, right? It's not about making an X on a map, and it's not about names. It's about this idea of spatial settings for human activity. And there's a few different kinds of academic work that I like to read on this topic. If you're interested during Q&A, I can talk more about this. But this idea from Tim Ingold, who's an archaeologist, of taskscapes, that places are created as people move around and do stuff. This idea of indexicality, and this is from this terrific, this image on the right-hand side of the screen is from a book, and which is also a great website called Maps Are Territories, Science is an Atlas. That's where I got this idea of indexicality from. I really warmly encourage all of you to take a look at that website. I can drop the link in chat when I'm done talking. And I'm going to be using a few more examples from that website. And then this idea from Michael Curry, a geographer, topos, choros, and geos, where geos is basically the world of maps. Choros is the world of places, like we're talking about, these sort of fixed location on the Earth's surface where people do stuff, name names, and make meanings. And then this third idea, these are all sort of classical Greek notions, the idea of topos, is that places make meaning in combination with each other. People move, right? You can't have one place. You have collections of places where people talk about journeys they've been on, right? Where people talk about many different places that exist in a city or in a country or something. And so this idea, right, we know the word topos through ideas like topology and topography, and there's this idea of these sort of networks of interconnected locations. So all of these are really the kinds of ideas I think about when I think about place and when I teach about place. And so, like I was saying on the last slide, and this is another one of the terrific examples from that Maps of Territories book that I was just talking about, is that place names are always about networks and relationships. And this is a really interesting Native American 18th century map that was used in treaty making. And, you know, as this quote on the right-hand side of the screen says, it's not about trying to be sort of accurate. It's not like an XY coordinate. This is where I am in latitude and longitude. This is where my GPS says I am. It's a way for the Native people who made this map to communicate about their relationships, right? And if you look on the right, the sort of the bottom right corner of that map, right, everything else is sort of in circles. There's this one square with only one line of connection, and that says Virginia, right? And so it's this idea of this deeply networked Native world with this concept that there's this other thing called Virginia that's only very loosely connected to it. And this again is sort of how to think about place, not just as like Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as a place, but within the context of networks, relationships, human activity, and events. And what this means also is that the same place may have different meanings to different people, and to make relationships among each other and among people in different kinds of ways, right? That one sort of, you know, barely linked box that said Virginia was meaningful in one kind of way to the Native authors of that map, a map that shows what Virginia is and what other places it's related to would look very, very different if it were created by colonists. And what this implies is that places can have many, many different networks with one another. Places can have many different names at any given time and over time, right? Like the example of the Columbus statue, right? The, you know, what you call that location in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania can change, and what you call, right, and where the location is of, say, the French-Belgian border can change, even if France and Belgium remain the same. And this is another one of my favorite, and here, what I'm going to introduce on the right-hand side of the screen is another one of my favorite examples from that Maps or Territories book. And it's about a place called the Gulf of Bouthia, which you can see here marked with a red X. And the Gulf of Bouthia is a place that was mapped. This map on the left is by Sir John Ross, who was a Scottish Royal Navy officer and polar explorer. He was tasked in the mid-19th century with taking this sort of circumpolar route around the Earth and mapping every place as he went. And so for him, the places he was interested in were sort of the space, well, sort of go off on a tangent a little bit, right? Place, as we've been talking about, is this idea of where people make meaning and where events happen. Geographers often sort of juxtapose the idea of place with the idea of space. And the idea of space is that it is something you can put on a map. It doesn't necessarily have names. You're not interested in the human relationships. You're not interested in distinguishing how some location on a map is the same or different from some other place on a map, right? It's this idea of this sort of continuous and mathematical world. It's like that geos world in Topos, Koros, and Geos that I talked about a few minutes ago. So this is a map of the Arctic as space, right? This sort of undifferentiated, here's how we British explorers can move around, right? But in order to create this map, what he was doing day after day is the kind of activity that you see on the upper right-hand side of the screen, which is that he would sail somewhere, he would identify Native informants, he would sit down with them and listen to them talk about their locality, the place where they make meaning, the place that is their homeland, right? And then sort of transfer that, starting with sketch maps, like you see on the bottom right-hand side of the map, right? Turning that into something like this global Arctic map that you see on the left. And so it's, again, this idea of different kinds of meeting up of people in space, right? Different ideas about placemaking and different ideas about how some location on a map is meaningful to someone or another. And you can see here that this Gulf of Bouthia and this sketch map on the bottom right-hand side here does not have any names other than the name. And of course, Gulf of Bouthia is not an original native name at all. It's a name that Captain John Ross imposed on this place, but it looks like something very different if you try to resurrect the native history of place. And that's what this recent map that was created by Dr. Margaret Wickens Pierce from the University of Maine, right, who did a map of Indigenous place names in Canada. And she, which includes the Gulf of Bouthia, but here it's called something very different, right? It has a whole, in fact, the Gulf itself does not have a single name. It is a cluster. It's surrounded by names, and those names reflect ideas about activity and meaning, right? A lake where a kayak is used, a place where it's possible to create eggs, place to collect eggs, places where there may or may not be fish, places where different kinds of plants can be harvested, right? It is a totally different idea of how to take the same space on the Earth's surface and make it rich with names that reflect a totally different human history. And that's the kind of work that it's possible to do if you and your students think sort of with a lot of creativity about place names and create activities that ask students to kind of take names and really understand what's behind them. In the Chinese tradition, it takes 19 chapters to have a book, a sort of an encyclopedia that describes one particular county, and an entire chapter just to say, where is this place on the face of the earth, right? To say what's around it, what's its astrological setting, what places are inside this place, right? How has the government named this place differently over time? And so these are also the kinds of things we can study and introduce to students to just kind of unsettle this idea of a place or a place name for wherever you might. Of course, starting with your localities, wherever you are, is a really great way to start to think about these. What are you actually talking about when you say where you are, and when you say what is this place called, and what other things might it have been called in the past? What are some different names that it has right now at this moment, depending on where you are? Beijing has had many, many different names over time. This is from a Wikipedia page about all of the names of Beijing, each of which has its own historical story. Who named it that? Why has it been called that at some kind of time? Where can you find historical maps that might include one name or another? And this is true of, almost every place in the world. If you start digging, and if you use tools like the World Historical Gazetteer that we're going to introduce you to in a few minutes, you can start to see how many different stories there are. And of course, every name is a story, right, for any place that you might be interested in. And now we're sort of starting to move towards the World Historical Gazetteer. If you look for Beijing in the World Historical Gazetteer, you see that many different places, if you look at this map on the upper left, the sort of the right-hand side of the upper left, you can see that there are many different places that have been called Beijing in China in the past, in the present, using different Chinese characters in some cases, right, and start to sort of explore the world through that one place name. And if you click on the Beijing that is the Beijing that you think of, the northern capital of China, you start to see the different kinds of information that we've used, the different historical sources, the different kinds of storytelling associated with that one place. We'll talk about this more in the future, so I don't want to go into too much detail about this. Another example, and the last time I gave this talk was in Spain, so I'm using a Spanish example here, that one of the cities I visited was called San Sebastian, and it's in Basque territory. And so it has a name in the Spanish language. It has a different name in the Basque language. And, my first thought was, these obviously have nothing to do with each other. San Sebastian and Donostia must mean totally different things. What I learned is that they don't mean different things, right? Both of them are about the same saint, but what that saint is called in Basque is different from what he is called in Spanish. And so this is a story about the long-term, centuries old Christianization of Europe, but still in a region where there's linguistic diversity. There's a challenge about whose names are the legitimate names in one language or another language. And so both of these names persist in the same place. And so behind any of these names and places, there are always stories to tell and things to think about like this. And so another way of putting this, the word gazetteer, which I've started using, but I haven't really defined, a gazetteer is just a list of place names. And so what follows from what I've been saying is that a gazetteer, which is a list of place names, is also a list of information about events, acts of place naming, acts of changing names, acts of saying that a place, changes from one kind of status to another, maybe from a city to an archaeological site, right? Or maybe from a church to a tourist site or something. And all of these things can be recorded in historical gazetteers, even the changing course of a river, like this example on the left-hand side of the slide. The name stays the same, but the location changes over time. One of the things that we can do also with gazetteers, with these kinds of creative searches for thinking historically about place names, is to tell global stories. And the search that I did here in the World Historical Gazetteer is for any place name starting with Santa, right? So to look for saints who's right, Santa Maria or, Santa Cruz, right? And what you discover is a sort of a global history of the Spanish world, a little bit of the Italian world, but a whole sort of Spanish world that includes lots of santas in Spain and Portugal, but also in every place in North and South America that was at some point colonized by Spain and Portugal, and also in the Philippines. And so just by doing a place name search, you start to uncover these kinds of global stories. So with that, I want to make sure there's time for the rest of our activities today. So these examples are all from the World Historical Gazetteer. I'm going to be turning over the floor to my collaborator, Karl Grossner, in just a minute. But this idea is to link knowledge about the past via place. It's a platform that allows people to do place name searches, to upload their own databases of place names, to make lesson plans about places, create collections of places, with the idea that places can be linked to other places, and knowledge about events and about the human past can be linked to place. And you're going to be hearing more about this, but since this is a teaching workshop, I want to highlight the fact that we have a page of teaching resources and lesson plans, a short essay that I wrote about place and world history that kind of goes through some of what I've introduced in this talk, and we'll have a chance to look at that more later today as well. And then finally, I want to acknowledge our team, our funders, and invite you to spend some time with us throughout the rest of the afternoon. So let me stop sharing and turn over the floor to Karl, who's going to do a live walkthrough of the World Historical Gazetteer website. So, Karl.
Okay. Thanks, Ruth. And thank you all for being here. And I'm really glad to have this chance to walk through what World Historical Gazetteer is in part. It's kind of tough to show all of it in 20 minutes, but with the focus leading us towards its teaching applications. World Historical Gazetteer is a web-based platform that attempts to provide a window into, a resource for approaching the study of place and places in the manner that Ruth was just talking about. So it's a technological attempt to facilitate teaching and research and thinking about place in the ways that Ruth was talking about. We've been at it for about 5+ years, and with many more to come, I think. It's fully operational website. I encourage you to go to whgazetteer.org for at least one of the breakout sessions. You would have to register and log in order to follow along. That's easy to do. It's the typical routine where you give a name and an email address, and you get an email back saying, "Is this you?" That sort of thing. What World Historical Gazetteer does in a single sentence is this. We are aggregating and linking attestations of historical places contributed by researchers from many disciplines who study the past. This makes it really quite a different thing from the Gazetteer that's underneath Google Maps, for example, or GeoNames, if you've ever heard of that, or any of the really very large modern gazetteers. This is it's a resource for research and teaching, and the bulk of the data over time will come from historical sources. The use cases that we have thought about and have built this for so far include these: mapping of historical sources. So lots and lots of researchers really want to map their sources. They want to see the where of the source material that they're working with. And there are many things within World Historical Gazetteer that facilitate that. Having discovered references to place within historical sources, many researchers develop small, specialized gazetteer datasets that they would then like to publish as part of their research publication. And not everyone has the capability to stand up a web resource to display or to provide record level access to that data, but World Historical Gazetteer is a venue for publishing such data sets. Linking attestations for the same place from multiple sources. Or you saw an example of that on a screen that Ruth showed earlier, where you saw several attestations about the place Beijing, one of the places, Beijing, that is, but many attestations for it coming from various sources. And go into a little bit of detail about that and why that's important. This is a linked data project. If people who are gathering place references from their historical sources can say that their Beijing is the same as a Beijing that lives in Wikidata or that lives in the Library of Congress catalog and so on and so forth, and somebody else says that their Beijing, which perhaps has a different spelling or even a different transliteration, is also a close match with that record in the Library of Congress catalog or Wikidata, that now those two attestations from different sources are linked, and they they might very well come from, and frequently do come from, projects within different disciplines. In this way, linked data projects have the promise, the potential for linking projects that are concerned with the same region and period, but also disciplines. There's a lot more to say about that, but I'm going to move on to another use case, which is to link gazetteers themselves. So what you see on the right is an illustration of a dataset collection that is in development and is visible in World Historical Gazetteer called Dutch Global History, which could also be said to be Dutch colonial history. It is possible for multiple data sets that concern the same theme or the same region / period to be linked within our platform and thereby create what we're calling a focus domain, for example, for Dutch global history. And last, but very much not least, is teaching. So for the last year especially, we've been particularly focused on applications that this platform can be put towards for teaching in various ways. A little bit about the kinds of sources that we see. The two broad types, I would say, geography of a territory. So what you see illustrated on the right is an atlas of Central Asia, and that's been digitized, and there's several hundred places from that region over a period of probably a millennium have been entered, and the other one is of Europe that you see illustrated there. Projects called historical GISs are typically a part of this. That is, these are projects that are recording the geography of some territory, usually constrained to some period. The other kind of contribution source is a geography of a theme, and this is much more typical of many research projects. So somebody is studying something, for example, our colleague Susan Grunwald is studying German POW camps in a post-war period and has discovered there were several hundred sites, and she's developed a lot of data concerning this material, including the places that are involved, the camps themselves and the settlements near them. This becomes one of those smaller gazetteer data sets that I referenced earlier that can be very usefully added to our database and our index. I'm going to step through the process for data coming into World Historical Gazetteer a little bit, just very briefly. Over on the left, you see researchers, that is contributors or potential contributors who are developing data, all sorts of data, not only place data, but as Ruth was saying, data about events and people involved in the events and the locations of those events and so on. The contributions to World Historical Gazetteer will be comprised of the place data that emerges from research projects like that. People keep their data in all sorts of formats, and we have nothing to say about how anyone should keep and manage their data. Spreadsheets, databases, GIS files, RDF, and so forth. To become a contribution to our index, we need for data to arrive in the same format, actually one of two flavors of a format that we developed called linked places format. And that data goes into a database where it is kept permanently, and each record, each row is assigned a permanent identifier. There's a further step that people can take to link their places one by one, potentially with other records for the same place that are already in our index. And as I said, we are agnostic as to how people keep their data. People arrange and work with their data in a manner that suits the questions that they have and so on. There are a set of screens, which I won't walk through now, that are related to screens and functions that are related to this ingest process that I've just been describing. People upload a file. Once they pull the place data out of their larger data set, typically, they convert the file to the format that we need to see. They upload it. The result is a screen labeled describe here, where they can see the metadata that they've created about that data set. And they can browse the places. If they have geographic coordinates for their records, they can see those on a map. They can browse them and search and so forth. And they can reconcile their places with Wikidata, which is a giant public linked data store. We keep a copy of about 3.5 million place records from Wikidata. And we ask that people reconcile, that is, to send their data set against Wikidata and find all potential matches possible. That has two impacts, potentially. One is they can find geographic coordinates for places, geographic coordinates that they didn't have for some of their places, and they can pick up identifiers to other authorities, which is a great aid in the sort of linking that I was talking about earlier. Here's a detail of the having sent a file for reconciliation. Then people have to review the results. That is, the machine does not decide whether something is a match to your record, something in Wikidata. This screen shows that an uploaded record on the left for Kilia and two potential matches found in Wikidata, and the contributor marches through their records one by one, reviewing these matches and deciding, is there a close match, or is there more than one close match, or are there no matches? And then their data can be made public following that step. And when it's made public, it is essentially published. It's a published data set that has record level access in a variety of ways. And it has not a very fancy public screen yet, or maybe in time this will be improved a lot. People would have to, of course, we can't make up the content, so the contributors would have to be prepared to offer more elaborate descriptions. But really, it's a record level access to an uploaded data set. And as I said, there is this next step of linking it into the index, but it can be public before that. Okay, so now you see on the bottom, there's a database and there's an index, and you've seen a little overview of the ingest process for getting data into those and what sorts of data get in there. And on the top, you're seeing here the applications so far of what can be done with that data within our interface. One is search. Another is to browse, which you see, I'm not seeing my entire screen. Another is to browse, as you see on the right. So all of the data sets that have been made public are browsable and so forth. And they're searchable in a variety of ways. You can search only the database or also the index. And teaching. So there are teaching applications, which we're going to talk a lot more about later. And an application programming interface, that is, ways that other projects can make use of data that lives in our database and in our index. And there are several projects that are currently working towards using World Historical Gazetteer data and making it available in whatever they're doing, for example, annotation applications. I mentioned dataset collections already. This is an illustration of the Dutch Global History collection that shows that there are 6 datasets so far that are beginning to indicate a spatial footprint of the Dutch colonial empire at some point over time. Each of these can be isolated. You can drill down, search against against all of the places within those 6 data sets. There's another kind of collection that we've just recently added that you'll be going into in depth in the breakout session number 2, called place collections. And place collection is a functionality that allows you, anybody, your students, to create a collection of places drawn from any public data set within World Historical Gazetteer. So it's not entire data sets, although you can include an entire data set, but you can grab individual records or groups of records from this data set and that one into some thematic collection for some purpose. And this is an example of one that was developed as an example by our colleague Susan Grunwald about Hernan Cortez's conquest of the Aztec Empire, where all of the places are waypoints on the journey, I'm not sure, the expedition, the movement of Cortez through that part of what is now Mexico. Each record can be annotated individually as to why that record has been included in here. And you'll see that in breakout session number 2 in considerable detail. But just to summarize about World Historical Gazetteer, what makes it distinctive, and it is a distinctive project, if we do say so ourselves. It's also very ambitious, as you could probably tell. It's distinctive in having 7 attributes in combination, which is that its geographic coverage is global. It includes structured granular temporal information, and this is not included in any of the global Gazetteer resources that are out there. It is included in some regional ones that are out there. The attestations of place, as I mentioned, come from historical sources that are contributed by researchers. I should say that of the 2 million plus places and 5 million plus names that are in our index so far, a large proportion of those come from the Getty Thesaurus of Geographic Names, which does not include temporal scoping of records, but we included those in order to have really quite broad global coverage. And over time, we'll see temporal depth be added because all new contributed data does include temporal scoping. So we'll get temporal depth over time. It is a linked data publishing platform, as I mentioned, for people without a web presence. All of these things I mentioned, so just reviewing them, I guess, multiple attestations for place are linked, effectively linking projects and disciplines. That's a somewhat grandiose thing to say, but I think there's considerable potential there. And there's quite a lot of interest in the digital historical research world for doing this sort of place linking. Faceted record level search across data sets and machine access via APIs. Various projects have one or more of these attributes, but none have all of them. And we're hopeful that it will become a permanent piece of digital infrastructure. We expect that it will be. We've seen considerable support from various groups within the University of Pittsburgh and some global partners. Dozens and dozens of data sets that are in a queue, waiting to make their way into our database and index. There's a lot of, I would say that there's considerable momentum. I don't know if Ruth mentioned, earlier this year, we won a prize of Digital Humanities Best Tool or Set of Tools, which was indicated to us that there's a community of people out there who also see potential in this. But potential aside, there's quite a bit that can be done right now, and you guys are going to walk through a lot of that. So I think I end this here right now. I hope I didn't go over. Let me stop share.
Yeah. No, that's perfect timing. We're right on time. So according to our schedule, we're moving now right into the first breakout session. So we're going to have, I think that Lynn or somebody has organized breakout sessions, I believe. So we're now going to have a series of 3 breakout sessions, is what the rest of the afternoon looks like, with a little sort of brief reconvening in between. And the 3 breakout session leaders are going to be myself and Kathy Fratto from the Asian Studies Center, who is our superstar collaborator on our educational applications, and also Nathan Michaelwitz, who is the amazing new postdoctoral fellow at the World History Center. So the 3 of us will each be facilitating a breakout room, and you should last week have received some worksheets that we're going to be working through in the breakout rooms. And Karl, I think you're going to maybe be available for questions, or maybe kind of making your way from one breakout session to another. And so if you have any questions for Karl or for me, we will both be around throughout the rest of the afternoon. And I see that Kathy has also reposted the sort of the worksheets for our first 2 breakout sessions. So if you don't have it handy, there it is. So in that case, I think we can move right into the breakout sessions. I think we'll have time for, we didn't put Q&A time into our session now, but we'll end the day with time for a Q&A session, and we can also do Q&A during the breakout rooms. So, so I think we will move to our breakout rooms now, and then we will see you to regroup at 1:35. So enjoy your breakout rooms, and we will be together again soon.
Thank you so much. And we will see you back in the main room in a little bit. Thank you again.
Zita, you are muted.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you had access to the breakout rooms, but I believe that Lynn has made you co-host as well. So you have free passage throughout all of them, I believe. So that should give you free access to move around as you wish. I think so, yes. Okay.
I'm sorry, Zita, were you asking me something?
No, I was just wondering if you had access to all of our breakout rooms that were.
I haven't really looked to see if that's possible.
Okay.
I may have to be invited to them. I'm not sure.
I believe that.
Oh, I see.
Has, yeah, assigned you to number 2.
Okay, yeah.
I think.
Well, I see that I can move. I apparently have the option to move around.
Yeah. As co-host, you would have that ability. Yeah. Okay.
So,
please let me know if you need any assistance from any of us. Not that I would be a very tech-savvy person in terms of breakout rooms, but I'll try.